Welcome back. Are we seeing a more proactive approach in Chinese foreign policy this year? Let's continue with our panel discussion. Joining me from Beijing, Victor Gao, a Chinese international relations expert. From Johannesburg, Bob Wekesa with the China-Africa Reporting Project at the University of the Witwatersrand. From London, Kerry Brown, a professor of Chinese studies at King's College, and with me in the studio is Andrew Small, Transatlantic Fellow with the German Marshall Fund's Asia program. And let's start this part of the program with Kerry in London. Kerry, let's look a little bit more closely at the relationship with the United States. President Xi paid a visit to the United States this year. His first stop was in Seattle. Let's take a listen to some of what he said in Seattle.
Our Belt and Road Initiative, our establishment of the Silk Road Fund, and our proposal to set up the AIIB are all aimed at helping the common development of all countries rather than seeking some kind of spheres of political influence.
So, Kerry, during that visit, President Xi said China will never seek hegemony or engage in expansion. What was the message there to Washington, and how was that received?
Well, I think that China's on a hunt for sort of more strategic space. So really the story of the last 10 years, so this predates Xi Jinping becoming, sort of general secretary and president, is really to sort of find that space when it's this huge economy. It has a kind of lot of international influence now. It's, I think, the main trading partner for something like 150 countries in the world. It's really, really integrated into the global economy, at least, and yet, it doesn't really have the sort of commensurate sort of geopolitical space. And I think it feels that within its region, the kind of maritime area and the kind of immediate vicinity of China, it has the right to have that kind of strategic space. So I think the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and the One Belt, One Road are sort of two sides of the same coin, really. The AIIB, which was kind of resisted by America and Japan and initially by Australia, who eventually joined, is, I think, trying to use China's knowledge of development, which has been very successful, to create this, kind of area around it where it's able to invest in infrastructure and help its partners. So there's a sort of economic narrative there. The One Belt, One Road, as I said earlier, is a little more abstract, and at the moment it's got something like 65 members, and so it's very, very diffuse. And I presume that this will be, kind of something, if it's got any meaning, then it will be something that we'll see through the visits that Xi Jinping makes. And the response from America, I presume, will also be to wonder whether there is a stronger narrative rather than just this at the moment, fairly benign-sounding economic one.
Victor, I want to move to another part of the world right now, and that is Latin America and China's influence in Latin America. This is a part of the world where the United States, for geographic reasons, I guess, has had a lot of influence over the past few decades. Is that changing now? Is China encroaching upon the United States' dominance in the region?
Yes, on the one hand, the United States still keeps great influence in Latin America. On the other hand, if you look at the past track record of the past 2 to 3 decades, the U.S. investments in Latin America and the economic and trade engagement with many Latin American countries have not yet increased significantly, whereas many Latin American countries will need, foreign direct investment, transfer of technology, transfer of manufacturing capacities, and more importantly, trade. And China actually feels in a big vacuum in terms of becoming the largest trading partner with many Latin American countries, but also more recently, China is becoming a large direct investor in many sectors in Latin American countries, and China is coming up with new ideas and development paradigms for Latin American countries. For example, China's offer to help Latin American countries to build this railway from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific coast across the Andes will really help many Latin American countries to make good use of much more improved infrastructure and connectivity and get a much higher premium for the goods and services that they can sell to the Asian Pacific region, because this is really the booming area for many years and decades to come. Therefore, I would say China is not competing with the United States in Latin America for political influences. China does not have a political ideology to sell to any country in the world. What China offers is a good, solid track record of development, focusing on trade in particular, but more and more direct investment and financial services, etc. China can offer what we call a total package in a one-stop way. And that involves not only trade, but more increasingly investment, financial support, and training, human resources, more importantly, development paradigms.
Kerry, let's look at President Xi's visit to the United Kingdom. That was also a very high-profile visit. It was afforded a very warm welcome. He addressed the British Parliament. Let's listen to what the British Prime Minister David Cameron had to say about that visit.
This visit marks the start of a new era. Some have called it a golden era in relations between Britain and China, an era of stronger economic ties, deeper trade links, closer relations between our peoples, and meaningful dialogue on the issues that matter to us both.
Lofty words there from the British Prime Minister David Cameron. What did you make of it?
Well, I think that something needed to be done about the UK-China relationship because it had become a bit sterile on both sides, and you know, the problem is that there's a lot of history, and for the UK really searching for a sort of post-colonial sort of space really where it's not all about the kind of issues of Hong Kong or those of its sort of colonial kind of history with China, but is more about now and the future. So I think it's good that the British government, particularly the finance minister, the sort of Chancellor of the Exchequer, Osborne, has taken ownership over this relationship because it's always been slightly underplayed in the UK system, and it's good that the senior politician is taking such a close interest. But it is a risky one because it's really kind of caused problems with some of the UK's allies in Europe and also America. Britain joining the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank earlier than any of the other Europeans was a bit of a problem with the United States, and you know, I think this will all be fine if there are very tangible results. The British have, I think, expended quite a lot of political capital on this relationship, and I think that there'll need to be quite quick results. The 60 billion worth of deals that was signed during their visit, well, it's good, but you know, those have all got to happen, and some of them are going to be very contentious, like the nuclear one. So it's really about the implementation and about whether tangible results can come quickly to sort of offset some of the political flack that the UK has taken with its allies.
Okay, let's go to Bob in Johannesburg for one final thought. And Bob, how do you see the relationship with African countries unfold in the coming years?
No, I think the relationship between China and African countries can only, you know, become better and better in the coming years, to the extent that none of the, or at least very few of the, you know, big global powers in the EU and America and the US can actually match China in terms of commitments of, say, $60 billion as happened last week, the week before last, when President Xi Jinping announced a $60 billion bonanza for the continent. Equally on the political front and on a global setting, I think the South-South cooperation mantra that China promotes and African countries kind of log onto is very sounds very sexy for African leaders and African governments, and it's not something that is very enticing. It is very attractive to many Africans, and therefore it is something that will shape the relationship going forward. And equally, many African countries look up to China as a counterweight to you know, the kind of proselytizing and preaching from the Western you know, hemisphere powers, and therefore China will continue playing a major role. I think there will be issues with regards to a number of two issues, particularly with, as far as you know, Chinese immigrants, particularly entrepreneurs who don't come through government-to-government relations are concerned, because we've noticed one or two clashes here and there, but I think these will be issues that can be sorted out by governments if they focus on them going forward. Just a final one is that I think one of the biggest gains for African countries coming out of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit that was held here in Johannesburg was the focus, heavy focus on industrialization. And this is an area in which China can gain quite, Africa can gain quite substantially, because as China goes through the new normal and looks to transfer some of its manufacturing units elsewhere, Africa is more than willing to openly embrace this and accept many of these factories, so that Africa as a country endowed with natural resources but with very poor value addition to raw materials can then go up the value chain and benefit from its resources. So, there are gains on the economic, cultural and political front going forward.
Right. Andrew, just a little time left. What did you make of the talks that President Xi had with the Taiwan leader, Ma Ying-jeou, in Singapore?
It was symbolically important. Of course, we haven't seen meetings between the two leaders before. It was, despite the fact there was a degree of controversy about it in Taiwan, particularly going into the elections where the KMT are expected to lose to the DPP. I think the sense that this was a degree of kind of positive risk-taking on China's side, quite a bold move in terms of a willingness to deal with the Taiwanese at a level of parity that they hadn't been willing to in the past. I think in terms of the looking forward on the Taiwan relationship and what it means for China's posture in the region, and even leading into the elections themselves, it's a degree of important risk-taking on Xi Jinping's part that I think you might not have seen from previous leaders, and you didn't see from previous leaders.